I'm Kiyan.
And this is Trust Your Doctor, that podcast with molten ice. Because this week we watched Planet of the Daleks.
Written by Terry Nation.
Directed by David Maloney.
And aired in April and May of 73. Terry Nation is back.
Yeah, his most recent writing for the show before this was The Feast of Stephen. That fantastic Christmas episode that just showed up in the middle of the Daleks' master plan.
And broke the fourth wall, and is the
ruined
only...
the serial.
Is the only Doctor Who episode probably ever to break the fourth wall, I'm assuming.
It was a Christmas episode. They were like, this is going to be a good plan. I mean, it wasn't. Evidenced by the fact that it got junked and is... like, irrecoverable, but, you know.
I'm sure people who care about the canon and are into stuff like that pretty much hate it, but this is about Planet of the Daleks, not Feast of Stephen. Thank goodness.
The good thing about Doctor Who canon is that the BBC hasn't said explicitly what is canon and what isn't, so you can just selectively disregard serials or episodes that you don't like.
That's nice. But yeah, previously Terry Nation directed The Daleks, the second serial of Doctor Who, and created the Daleks and the Thalls.
And the Void.
That much less recognizable species.
That's true. There was a comic book series where it was implied the Void evolved into the Cybermen, though.
That's interesting in its own right. Kind of.
Kind of
really
weird. And somehow I don't think makes a lot of sense, but whatever. This
like
is Planet of the Daleks cost, not comic book cost.
And, right, so last week, if you listened to last week's episode, or if you've watched Frontier in Space, you know that it leads right into this.
Yeah. The Doctor has passed out in the TARDIS. Joe is like, what's going on? Doctor, why are you passed out? And then he has a brief moment of lucidity to tell Joe to use the TARDIS recorder to jot down notes. Not the second Doctor's recorder, like tape recorder.
Pretty much the only purpose that served was to have Joe narrate most of the first episode, since she was alone most of the first episode. So, you know, the recorder allowed her to talk to herself without looking insane, to sort of narrate what was going on and not just have the episode be her running around a jungle for 15 minutes, which is what it pretty much is anyway.
Yeah, she runs around in the jungle for a bit. She gets sprayed with some stuff and some plants, and then she stumbles upon a spaceship and investigates.
Right.
The reason she left the TARDIS was because the Doctor was passed out and she wanted to go look for help.
Yeah, and she mentions into the recorder, actually, that the Doctor's cold and his hearts aren't beating very fast. So yeah, she runs into this spaceship and sort of looks around inside. Meanwhile, something unseen is about.
What?
The Spyridon.
Spyridon doesn't show up till the Thalls have already showed up.
Oh, right, it shows up after them. But yeah, we have more invisible enemies this serial.
Well, the good thing about the invisible enemies in this serial...
Well, not like, enemies, actually.
Well, yeah. Enemies-ish. Because they're slaves of the Daleks.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, anyway, the good thing about the invisible creatures in this serial was that they actually turned them into a plot point instead of just having them be invisible for the sake of being invisible. A very brief plot point, but they did it. Yeah, they did it, but
still leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
And they also gave them those purple cloaks, which became another plot point later. The Spyridons were just important, even though you couldn't see them.
Yeah, it's mainly Wester, or whatever his name was. Wesker from Resident Evil. No. Never even played Resident Evil.
Well, anyway, Joe, just so, as we briefly mentioned, Joe's in the spaceship and some humanoid-looking creatures, human-looking people show up and
they're the Thalls. I'm just going to say they're the Thalls.
Well, I mean, you don't find that out till, like, episode 2, but anyway, they talk... You find it out when they're talking with the Doctor and he's like, oh, I recognize you guys. You guys
it's
are
like the end of
Thalls.
1. Because they see the Dalek at the end of one. The Thalls show up, and before we continue, I just have to mention that this was some season 1 level nonsense where all of the Thalls looked almost exactly the same, and until they started to sort of differentiate their personalities, kind of into episode 2, I couldn't tell them apart at all, really.
They were wearing spacesuits.
Yeah, but they all had they all had blonde hair and they all had the same haircut. It was hard to tell them apart for, most of episode 1 and kind of half of 2. After that, they started to differentiate their personalities quite a bit, actually, so it wasn't as hard to tell them apart. But, for 1 and 2, it was a little bit difficult. Also, I just want to say I like how Terry Nation kind of had to bring back the Thalls. I'm guessing this is what it is, because, he introduced the Daleks and the Thalls back in the Daleks, back in 63. And I guess all the other writers sort of just forgot about the Thalls. And, they sort of faded into obscurity a little bit, overshadowed by the Daleks. Unsurprisingly,
well, the Daleks were better.
Yeah.
Just all around more interesting.
Yeah. So I guess Terry Nation just kind of brought them back here. He's like, hey guys, the Thalls exist.
I mean, let's be honest, this serial is just the Daleks rebooted. It's just more
much.
Daleks versus Thalls with the Doctor helping them invade some Dalek city.
Yeah. They even have
even has the
the crappy Barbara Ganatus dynamic with Joe and what's his name.
It's not important what his name was.
It plays out exactly the same way.
It's harkening back to Peladon, okay?
Yeah, I mean, well, that plays out almost exactly the same way.
Yeah, well, anyway, so Joe mentions that the Doctor's stuck in the blue box, and they're like, well, I guess we can go help him. We've only got, 3 people, so...
Right, the Thalls, I guess we'll just mention it now, like we always do ahead of time. The Thalls are there on planet Spyridon. They explain this to the Doctor later, actually, to stop the Dalek invasion force from invading places.
Invading all places that were mentioned in Frontier in Space.
Yeah, this actually doesn't come into play until episode 4, but what the Daleks are doing on Spyridon, this isn't Skaro, actually, like we predicted last week. It's another planet called Spyridon, and the Spyridons themselves are the invisible aliens. But what the Daleks are doing there is they're assembling this invasion force to take over after Earth and Draconia have blown each other to smithereens, essentially.
Right. And the reason they're on Spyridon is because they're analyzing the Spyridon's invisibility powers to basically adapt them for their own use so they can also be invisible.
Right. Also, the dangerous plant life on Spyridon comes into play in their plan as they use it, or they're researching the fungus on Spyridon that's deadly to, immunize themselves to it and also kill off every living thing on Spyridon except themselves. Because that worked out so great in their city, in the Daleks.
Yeah, well, in that one they were going to use a neutron bomb, so... Well... So
that was my reaction to this entire serial, actually. It was just not a worthwhile follow-up to Frontier in Space, but anyway...
Well, alone it would have been better. And as a 4-episode serial, I think it would have been way better.
Yeah.
It was just super padded out.
Yeah, and there were a lot of things...
Which didn't help it.
Episodes 1 and 2 were fine, I think, but there are a lot of things we're going to get into later that didn't add much to the serial, but were thrown in anyway.
Yeah.
But where were we?
We're at the TARDIS door. being stuck closed due to the dangerous plant life creating this weird shell-like thing over the TARDIS. The Doctor's busy inside, almost suffocating.
Right.
He also changes his outfit off screen again. Now he's wearing a purple coat with a purple shirt.
Yeah, he wakes up
and
somehow.
Gloves.
He wakes up somehow. I guess possibly contacting the Time Lord sort of took it out of him for the time being, and then he just recovered.
Maybe. I read that it was like he can go into a coma to heal himself, and he's done it once before in another serial, but I don't remember what serial it was.
Must have been one of those serials where he was absent for most of the serial. Not Massacre, obviously, and not
No, he's done it before as the third Doctor, and that's why Joe kind of knew what was going on. I don't remember what serial it was now.
Yeah, I feel like that would be something I would remember, but I don't.
I remember when I read it, I was like, oh, so that's what it was, but I just don't remember what it was right now, so... I mean, maybe the wiki remembers.
Yeah.
Well, it says he's done it again, but doesn't say what the first time was. So, oh well. Well, anyway.
We'll mention that if we remember, but yeah, the Doctor is almost out of air.
Right, so... He's... Oh, it was the Daemons. When he was in... When he got knocked out when the cave collapsed.
Yeah, that wasn't actually that prominent looking back. Because Benton and Olive were up to their shenanigans. Her name was Olive, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Olive Hawthorne.
Yeah. Surprised we remember that.
Well, anyway, the Doctor's sealed in and the Thals show up and bust open the shell just as the emergency oxygen is about to run out. The emergency oxygen supply lasting like a good minute before being worthless.
Great. Didn't the Doctor mention that the emergency supplies were drained, actually?
He might have.
I think he did, somehow, and I don't think that was ever touched upon ever again or explained why they were drained.
Well, anyway, he busts out and he sees the Thals like, wait a minute, you look familiar. And then they have this moment where they're like, there's a legend of a man named the Doctor, and he had his companions. And the Doctor's like, oh yeah, it was Barbara, Ian, and Susan. And they're like, are you saying you're the Doctor? And he's like, yes. Actually, yes.
And they're, he explains things that only he would know.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty quick to believe it. You know, they kind of just accept he's the Doctor right away.
They seemed skeptical of it for the next 3 episodes. They didn't really believe him till they were trapped and they really had no choice. They seemed pretty skeptical for a while. And they because, I mean, they told him, like, you know, as soon as we get back to your companion, you know, you guys are on your own.
Yeah, I think that's because they had that might be due to skepticism. They also had a super important mission to fulfill in a limited amount of time and with limited manpower.
Yeah, since half of them died when they landed.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. This is actually the point where we find out they're Thals.
Yeah.
We mentioned it earlier, obviously. But yeah, this is also where the Spyridon is creeping around inside the spaceship that Joe is in. And also where the fungus starts to become prominent.
Right,
on Joe's arm, that is.
Right, because the Doctor had also been infected, but the Thals are like, here, use this, it'll heal you. And the Doctor's like, thanks. And meanwhile, it like keeps cutting away to Joe, just passing out because she's got fungus on her arm.
Right. Then the Thals mention the Spyridons, how they're invisible, what the heck they are.
And then there's the invisible Dalek that they spray and reveal, and then episode 1 ends.
Right, yeah, they see some tracks on the ground or something, and they're like, it's a Spyridon, so they have some sort of device to de-invisibilize the Spyridon / Daleks who are using Spyridon.
Yeah, it was that spray air can. It didn't spray air, it sprayed some other thing that they talked about.
Some chemical, was it, I guess? Or
something like that.
Yeah, but they spray it into Dalek, and they're like, dun dun dun. That's where episode 1 ends.
Then episode 2, Joe just gets carried away by the invisible thing, although we don't actually see that happen. Just kind of...
It's invisible.
Yeah.
Well, no, we don't see her being carried on screen, I think is what you meant, but
yeah.
Even if we did, we wouldn't see Spyridon carrying her because it's invisible.
Yeah. I know before we made fun of the invisible enemies for being like, oh, they must
being invisible.
They must be out of special effects budget. Let's just make the enemies invisible. I don't think that was the case here, since I feel like it would cost more to do that whole invisible floating bowl thing in the seal that they did than it would be to just like throw makeup on a person.
Maybe. They could, I mean, if they really were...
especially in the 70s.
There's probably a lot more information about this that we just don't know about or haven't read. But yeah, they could have gone for just crappy costumes, I guess, and they didn't. I mean, unless you want to count those purple shag rugs they threw over them as a crappy costume.
Well, anyway, the Spyrodin pours some
melted chocolate.
What?
That's what it looked like.
And then she accidentally gets engaged to the Spyrodin.
What?
No, I was making a reference to the Aztecs, where the doctor takes some chocolate from what's-her-name and gets engaged.
Wow. What a throwback.
The Aztecs wasn't that bad. Well, anyway. It cures Joe's arm, and she's like, thanks! But where are you? And he's like, I'm invisible. Except not like that, more like the Ice Warrior, so it was more like, I'm invisible.
No. Even the Ice Warriors weren't that exaggerated. Yeah, it sounded like the original Ice Warriors, not the toned-down Ice Warriors we got in Peladon.
The better Ice Warriors.
The cool Ice Warriors. What was his name? Slar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Islir.
Yeah.
How do we remember that? Anyway, so the Doctor and the Thals make it to the ship, only to see it promptly blown up by the Daleks. And the Doctor...
The Thals are just run into one bad luck situation after another in this serial. You kind of feel bad for them.
Yeah, and the Dalek pleads with the Daleks not to blow up the ship, because he thinks Joe is in there.
The Doctor, you mean?
Yeah, the Doctor.
You said
the Daleks plead with the Daleks, yeah. No, the Doctor was like, Daleks, no, there's someone in there, and then they blow it up, and he's like, I have nothing to live for.
I'm free! No.
Wow.
No.
No, instead he gets captured by the Daleks, and they take him to the city that they've just established on Spyrodin, and he meets with another Thal in the prison who's named Kodal.
Yeah, Kodal. Didn't we see him get captured before?
I think we saw him get captured when they were on the way to the spaceship. Yeah,
I could have sworn he was captured in the serial.
Goes off as a scout, and I think he gets captured.
Yeah. So yeah, the Doctor is locked up with Kodal in this cell. And meanwhile, the other two Thals we've seen, Weber and Terran, are sort of at odds with each other. This comes into play a lot more later, but I think we start to see it now. They kind of disagree about what to do. And Weber wants to... Terran actually is the commander of the mission. Well, he was not put in charge, but he assumed command after the actual commander died. He was, I guess, the next in line to take command. But Weber didn't like that. He wanted to be in charge. So this is where we start to see them at odds.
Right. And the reason they're at odds right now is because they found some explosives that they hid earlier, and they're arguing over whether they should just attack the Daleks with the explosives now, or if they should wait until later when they can get the Doctor out.
Right.
The Doctor and Kodal.
Weber wants to just go, go
ham.
Yeah. But Terran wants to be more careful, and he's probably right. Especially considering what happens to Weber later.
Well, anyway, the Doctor and Kodal are having a motivational speech. Not really motivational, more just the Doctor being like, you're not as wimpy as you think you are, Kodal.
Yeah, because basically Kodal was just a scientist. He wasn't really like a soldier or anyone fit to go on a dangerous mission, or at least he didn't think he was.
Yeah.
And he says since the only reason he even volunteered for the mission in the first place was because most of the Thals did. So he's like, I didn't even have the courage to break away from the norm, even when I didn't think I could be of any help. And the Doctor, I kind of liked this scene.
It was a good scene.
In the end, it was another one of those throwaway characterization moments that didn't exactly go anywhere. It's touched upon right at the end.
Yeah.
But there are a few other, moments of characterization with the Thals that didn't exactly go anywhere. I mean, given the option to have them or not, yeah, of course you would rather have the characters, more characterized rather than just blank slates there to perpetuate the plot. But I don't know. What I didn't like from this scene was, the sort of platitude the Doctor throws at Kodal, where he's like, courage isn't about being brave.
I wrote it down.
It's
courage isn't just a matter of not being frightened. It's being afraid and doing what you have to anyway.
Yeah, I kind of don't like stuff like that.
But it's very Doctorish.
Yeah.
It's in his character.
I don't know. I feel it's pretentious. Maybe not like in Serial, but I feel like the person writing it is like, yeah, this is a really good line or something like that.
Well, I think they're trying to characterize the Doctor to be less of a jerk like he was in the first two, in his first two seasons, Pertwee specifically, not the Doctor overall. So they're giving them the scene where he's kind of like, yeah, Kodal, you're not terrible. Like, you're a good guy. Like, even if you don't think you're doing the right thing, you were doing what was the right thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think he was actually explicitly saying that. I think he was just saying, like, be a little more confident and you probably can help. Something like that.
Yeah, especially when they're trying to escape and Kodal's just like, we'll never get out. We're just trapped here.
Hey, maybe he's being a realist. Except no, because they actually do escape. But, I don't know, I just feel lines like that or a little bit, lofty, pretentious, but whatever. I still liked the scene. Don't get me wrong.
You're gonna hate the reboot then. Those lines show up a lot during the 11th Doctor's run because he likes to think he's a hero.
Yeah. Lines like that show up a lot in modern movies and television, and I dislike most of them. But anyway.
Wow.
What happens next? The Doctor and Kodal devise this plan to escape. The Doctor has the recorder
from Jo.
Yeah, and I
think she dropped it somewhere. It's where he got it from.
He rewires it somehow, like he usually does. Just rewire anything and turn it into the exact item you need for the given situation. He rewires it into some sort of, what was it? It was some device to deactivate the Daleks in like a specific radius or something.
Yep, temporarily.
Yeah, forget what he calls it.
Probably not important.
I think he reversed the polarity of it, though. Pretty sure he dropped that line. But they can only use it once, and like you said, it's only temporary, so they have to use it wisely.
Right. Meanwhile, outside, another ship crashes, and Rebek shows up with two other guys, Lartep and Marat, but Rebek is talking to Varen, Weber, and Taryn. And she's like, yeah, we intercepted the message. It's not like a dozen Daleks, it's 10,000. Then episode 2 ends.
I don't think we actually mentioned that, but Weber and Taryn had thought there were only a dozen Daleks on the planet, and that they had just subjugated all the Spyridans somehow, and built their city. But no, it turns out there's actually 10,000, the largest Dalek invasion force ever.
Yeah. Including that time they invaded Earth, apparently.
Yeah.
Because the Doctor says it's the largest invasion force he's ever seen.
Yeah. And plus, the Dalek, sort of timeline or chronology, it's presented chronologically for them, I think we determined. And this doesn't...
This serial...
I don't think this throws a wrench in that. I think this makes sense chronologically from their point of view.
I think so. If we assume that the Day of the Daleks timeline didn't happen, because the Day of
Yeah, well, that introduces another timeline, so...
the Day of the Daleks is kind of a wrench in the system with that whole thing. But if we assume that didn't happen, that the Doctor successfully avoided that, the previous Dalek seal before that was what? Power of the Daleks?
Yeah. Yep.
Where they sort of all got killed, but didn't.
Except one. Just
rebooted the whole race.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. Well, that's Dalek continuity talk over. Let's not get into that anymore.
Yes, please no.
And then, so episode 3 begins. Joe, the Spider she's with is named Wester. I don't know if we mentioned that.
Because I mentioned Wesker.
Oh, right. So she sees other Spiders wearing blue fur coats, and Wester says that the ones that are wearing the blue fur coats are slaves for the Daleks, and they're basically working for the Daleks.
Right, and I think he mentions that the only reason they were wearing the coat... Well, he mentions that they were to protect from the cold Spiritan nights, but I think it was also so the Daleks could see them.
Yeah.
The coats looked like furry carpet.
Probably was.
Maybe.
So the Doctor and Kotal escape, actually. The jamming device thing that stops the Dalek that comes into the room works, surprisingly, and they make it out and they're running, and at that same-ish time, the group of Thals had decided it would be a good time to try bust out Kotal and the Doctor.
Yeah.
And at the same time as that, the molten ice volcano is becoming active, because it's revealed that the planet doesn't have a core of molten lava, it's molten ice.
Right. I think they, I thought this was a little bit dumb. They call it liquid ice at one point. Not water. Not water. Liquid ice.
Well, it exists. It's
it
a real
does?
thing. Yeah.
What?
You know, the states of matter aren't just solid, liquid, gas. There's like 16 states of matter. They just only teach you 3 in school because they're the most simple ones.
Yeah, well, there's only like 3 in your everyday life. Pretty much. I just think it's kind of dumb.
It's a real thing, though. So are you saying science is dumb now?
Yes, real life is dumb.
Okay.
But right, they introduced this liquid ice. I think, when do they introduce this? I know it's the beginning of 3, but I think I remember Terran explaining it to the Doctor. Is it after they escape the Dalek city?
I think Terran only explains it to the Doctor later when they've escaped.
Really? Huh. I could have sworn they explained it before it.
No, because the Doctor sees it when they've escaped right before they shove the Daleks into it. Spoiler. But anyway, yeah, the group busts in through a ventilation shaft, and now they all get trapped in the room, and Marat stages a valiant sacrifice to hold back the Daleks while the team gets inside the room, and they do, and Marat dies, being the first death of the serial and also occurring in episode 3. Rest in peace, Marat. He died like he lived, very quickly and on screen for a very short amount of time.
Right, but anyway, they're trapped in this room, and the Daleks are cutting through the doorway. And they don't know what to do because there's nowhere to go, except the Doctor mentions another ventilation shaft, I guess, which just goes straight up. And there's a draft, like a hot air flow going up conveniently, so they make this makeshift balloon type thing out of what looks like plastic sheets, and they use it. It lifts them off the ground. It works. They float up through the ventilation shaft in a long and drawn out scene. Well, I think this was another one of the things we mentioned before, that could have probably been cut down because they spend, it's not 10 minutes straight, obviously, but they spend like maybe half an episode in this shaft, and they cut back and forth to the scene multiple times, and it's just them in the shaft, making comments about "Don't look down now" and stuff like that. And it could have been condensed. It wasn't incredibly riveting watching them float up.
Well, there was kind of that humorous moment where the Daleks finally bust in, like, they must be hiding. Find them. Find them. And they, like, search for a minute, and one of them looks up and is like, found them.
I don't know. The Dalek... not voices, but the Dalek... what's the term even?
Mannerisms.
Yeah, the Daleks' mannerisms in this serial were entertaining, as they always are. Especially near the end, the assist. But anyway, yeah, they make it out. And a Dalek actually uses some sort of hovercraft thing.
Hoverboard.
Yeah.
It pulls
It is
a Marty
2015.
McFly.
Anyway, it uses that to start ascending. And they just drop a rock on it, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And then it plummets to its death.
Yeah. Actually, one of a couple times that a falling rock occurs in this serial.
You're gonna tell me that there's some ulterior theme behind falling rocks?
No.
Okay. Good, because I just
entire
call
serial
you
was
insane.
It was an ad for falling rocks. No.
What product would you name falling rocks?
There's pet rocks. I know that was a big thing, I think.
Falling rocks hair gel. I don't know. Protect your cranium from rocks with this rock hard hair.
Yeah, no. Clearly, the falling rocks symbolize an overarching. No.
Moving on. The Doctor and Peeps make it out of not the marshmallow. Make it out
What?
of the Peeps.
Oh, well, those
Never
things are
mind.
disgusting. No, I know what you're talking about, but yeah.
No, never mind. So they escape the shaft and they kind of regroup and they end up running into Joe, and Joe and the Doctor have a joyous reunion because Joe had actually been planning to bust into the Dalek City to save the Doctor. And yeah, they have a joyous reunion, and then they kind of go camp out at some place that has a name that I'm not remembering right now.
It's the...
Plain of Stones.
Yes, that. Because they determined that they need to formulate a plan, but they need somewhere safe to do it, and it's almost nightfall, but the Spyridon jungles are incredibly dangerous at night, so they need to go somewhere safe. So they go to the Plain of Stones. What was that? It was Plain of Stones, right?
Yep.
And which is, I think Kodal explains it actually. He says, during the day, these stones absorb sunlight, and at night, I guess they sort of disperse it, so I guess it remains warm during night, whereas the jungle remains cold. And they actually touched upon this before. I think Wester says that the Spyridon nights are bitterly cold or something like that.
Probably because the core is molten ice. But anyway.
So they head over to this Plain of Stones, which is not a rock quarry, surprisingly. It's a set. And yeah, they're sort of camping out there and they're formulating a plan. The Doctor and Joe, I think, go off somewhere because they're not on screen for all of this. They're on screen for when Weber assaults Terran because they disagree about what to do.
Well, they do bust in to break up the assault.
Yeah, but they're not there for like the first part of it.
I think they're off to the left, but yeah, they're not on screen. But what they're talking about is that Tabor is like, well, I think if we blow up the refrigeration units, we can destroy the Daleks, because
No.
it's keeping them alive.
Yeah, Kodal actually mentions that.
Yeah, well, someone mentions it, and Weber's like, let's just do it right now. And Terran's
Yeah.
like, no, it's nighttime. Let's wait till it's daytime and we know what we're doing.
Yeah, we didn't mention the refrigeration unit, but the Doctor and Kodal discovered it when they were in the city. They didn't know what it was for, and then Kodal hypothesized that it had something to do with the Daleks' plan, which it did.
But not in the way they thought.
Right. Kodal says, like we mentioned before, okay, if we destroy the refrigeration unit, we'll probably throw a wrench in their plan, and stop the invasion force. So, yeah, like you said, Weber wants to just go in and do it right now, and Terran's like, nope, nope, nope. So they start fighting, and then some other Thals break it up. We also didn't mention the plot point that never gets touched upon again, and this is another one of the throwaway scenes I was talking about before. You know, the nice but ultimately unimportant scenes where Rebek and Terran were actually, I guess, lovers. And Terran makes the comment like, "Oh, Rebek, you shouldn't have come here because now, if I'm forced to make a judgment call, I'm going to my judgment's going to be clouded because you're here." And you think that's going to come into play later, but it doesn't really.
It does once. When Weber storms off at the Planet of Stones, he's like, you'd be making better decisions if she wasn't here, and then he storms off.
Yeah, but he was at odds with Terran anyway. I feel like they would have, there would have come to a boil either way.
Yeah, but
and that was just part
Terran
of it.
said that his people are just going to use it as ammunition for not trusting his judgment, and then they did, so...
I guess.
I think they fulfilled the quota for touching on it again.
I guess. I mean, when they set it up, like when he says, "Oh, if I'm forced to make a judgment call, my vision's going to be clouded," do you think that's going to happen? But it doesn't.
Well,
either way, Weber storms off.
Terran and Kodal wake up later and are like, wait, where's Weber gone? Turns out he's taking the bombs. He's going to go bomb the Dalek compound. And they're like, great. So they follow him and they watch him get captured by some Daleks. And then episode 4 ends when they're looking around. There's eyes in the darkness.
Yeah, he gets killed by some Daleks.
Not yet. He doesn't get killed till episode
yet.
5. He doesn't get killed till episode 5.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Yeah, not till episode 5. But he dies in the jungle.
Yeah, he dies when the Daleks order him to take them to the base, and Weber's like, okay, and then...
Oh, right, yeah, he tries to make a break for it, and then they just shoot him.
Meanwhile, Terran and Kodal are watching, disguised in the fur coats that they stole from some Spyrodons that they knocked out.
Yeah. We also didn't mention the entire thing with Joe and the bombs and stuff. We should probably touch on that. The Thals had some bombs that they hid in the forest. The Daleks found out where they were because the location of the bombs was hidden on what's-his-name who died back in the city. So they go, try and disarm the bombs, but Jo takes some to hide them, and a rock falls on her head and knocks her out. And she just barely escapes getting blown up.
Should have used falling rocks hair gel.
Either way... Back at the campsite, some mysterious animals have shown up in the darkness. And by mysterious animals, I just mean little dots of light
in the darkness. Eyes in the darkness.
Yeah. That looked like little dots of light. Little dots of not menacing light.
Use your imagination. Their budget is like a nickel and some styrofoam.
Right, but the Doctor deduces that they're afraid of fire, so they need to keep the campfire going all night.
Yeah, that's how they resolve that cliffhanger. Most disappointing cliffhanger resolve ever.
Most cliffhanger resolves in this show are disappointing because most of them are resolved right in the first minute of the next episode.
Except that $10,000 one. That's not resolved till the end. But anyway.
Also kind of in a slightly disappointing manner, though. Or a slightly confusing manner, actually.
So Terran and Kodal come back and... They actually tell the Doctor about their plan to blow up the refrigeration. He's like, no, that would be terrible. That would just awaken all the Daleks. That would do the exact opposite of what you want.
Yeah, the Doctor probably should have mentioned this earlier. I mean, unless he figured it out within the last
I don't think
little bit.
He didn't know about the plan to blow up the refrigeration unit. He only knew that they wanted to blow up a part of the city.
He probably should have mentioned the refrigeration unit at some point, but he doesn't, so whatever. I mean, it's not like... first and second season of the Third Doctor tier where he just doesn't tell anyone anything and just goes about his own business, and when someone tries to understand, he just completely shuts them down. No, it's not like that. But he could have mentioned it. But yeah, you're right. He doesn't really know what they're planning on doing. And he doesn't know that Weber is just going to completely ignore chain of command and go off and do his own thing. So...
Nor was he probably even thinking about it. He was too busy being happy that Jo wasn't dead.
I guess, and that he escaped alive somehow.
But anyway, yeah, he mentions that, well, we can't blow the refrigeration unit, but we can get in and disable the Daleks, so here's my plan. He actually tells them his plan, but the audience doesn't find out about it. That trope where they're like, I've got a plan, and then you only see the plan in action and not explained.
Well, it's better that way. Would you rather have them just detail the plan
and then just not see it? Yeah, I want to see that for once. Just have them be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then explain it, and then just cut to after they do it. Like, yeah, that worked out really well.
Kind of like The Invasion.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually do that in The Invasion. They're like, we have to storm whatever the company's name was. And then it just cuts to the guy going, they killed all of them.
Yeah, that was good. It was a reversal of the trope. I mean, they shouldn't do it too often, like maybe once every 5 years, but...
So they should do it, 10 times in the run of the show is what you want.
Well, I mean, you make it sound like a lot, but that's 10 times over 50 years.
Yeah.
Which isn't that much.
Yeah. It's not like something you'd recognize over 50 years, like, hey, they're doing it again!
You would if they did it more often than every 5 years.
Yeah.
It's like how all of Season 5 was just Base Under Siege, and at first you didn't notice it till you were 4 serials in, you're like, this is just Base Under Siege again.
Well, I think we noticed it because we read it, and that kind of ruined the season for us, but either way, we're going way off topic here. They,
Well, the plan is to, since they've got the Spider furs and they've got Thalls, they have them act as decoys to bring the Dalek patrol to the Plane of Stones, and they shove them into the lake of molten ice.
Right, Joe's on the kill count now.
Joe and the Doctor both get +1. The Doctor gets another one later, but...
Right, and this was actually, the Daleks being affected by the molten ice was actually sort of a point of confusion, because they pushed them into the molten ice pools here, and mentioned that the sudden cold just killed them right out. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think they mentioned it was a sudden change in temperature here. Which is why
that
it
also
doesn't kill them later, because they were refrigerated, so the temperature change wasn't as drastic.
I guess. I don't think they ever say that. It makes sense, but I don't think they ever explicitly
I'm just trying to explain it
yeah.
away again.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
That's all I do with this show.
But right, they want to get into the Dalek city again, so they disguise themselves as Spyridans and Daleks.
Like the Daleks, where Ian hides in a Dalek.
Right. Except this time I think it's Rebek who gets in. The rest of them put on Spyridan furs, Spyridan coats actually, and are taken into the Dalek city. Meanwhile, the Daleks researching the fungus screw up majorly.
Not really. It's not really their fault. Wester comes in, he's like, gotta talk to you guys. They're like, we are busy. Then Wester's like... And then he shoves the bacteria over.
Spilling it.
Yeah, and only those 2 Daleks have been immunized to the bacteria, because they haven't distributed the immunization to all the rest of the Daleks and the Spyridans. So the Daleks can't open those doors, because as soon as they do, the bacteria will spread over the entire planet and kill everyone.
So there's another humorous, but at the same time dark-ish scene where the Dalek is like, we'll have to spend the rest of our lives in this room.
Yeah.
It's a little depressing if you think about it, even for a Dalek, you know?
I think it's depressing because it's the first time we've seen the Daleks be afraid of anything.
Is it? I mean, they've exhibited...
Only briefly?
Well, I mean, if you think about just previously when they were getting pushed in the ice pools, you could argue that was fear when they were like, assist! Assist! that was arguably fear.
Yeah,
I mean,
but that's
fear
the
for their own lives.
Same serial. I'm talking about, like, previous serials.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, there were times where they're sort of, I guess they knew they were about to die and they were just like ah. But yeah, no, I think that's probably the first, if not one of the first, or the other way around, actually, one of the first, if not the first, for the Daleks.
Hey, it's, like we said with the Master, it's more interesting when your enemies are developed.
The Master is humanoid and more relatable. Daleks are sort of just this evil force, and I kind of like them that way. But anyway,
I like the title of the next coming Dalek serial, Death to the Daleks.
Either way, the episode ends with the Doctor and Co getting found out because they neglected to cover their shoes, I guess, or they just couldn't. So the Daleks notice that they're not invisible and notice that they're not Spyridans.
Yeah, and now would be a good time to mention that originally Terry Nation wanted, I can't remember if it was the end of episode 4 or 5, but he wanted it to end with the Daleks massacring all the Thalls. And Barry Letts, the producer, was like, yeah, that's a bit dark for a show like this. It's supposed to kind of be a kid's show, so can you rewrite that? Thanks.
Maybe he was just mad that no one else had used the Thalls. So he was like, you know what? If you guys aren't going to use them, I'm just going to kill them all myself.
Well, also part of the reason Barry Letts told him to rewrite it was because apparently at this time the show's starting to be criticized for needless violence. And he didn't want a massacre of the Thalls to be on the table as, like, ammunition for people to throw at the show.
I guess. I mean, people's mindsets were, of course, different back then. I don't see, like, too many needless deaths yet. Well,
we're at 787 on the death count.
Yeah, but it's not like... Let's see what recently happened.
I mean, look at Frontier in Space.
I mean, I understand that a lot of deaths have occurred.
Look at the Sea Devils!
I don't necessarily think it's violent, though.
I think your definition of violent is just different from theirs.
I guess.
This is supposed to be a kid's program, so if you look at it in that light, like, your bar for it being violent is a lot lower than it would be as an adult, or... Maybe
it's just due to the fact that, it's back in the 60s and 70s. That might be part of it. But I don't see all the recent deaths as being violent, just from my point of view. Maybe it's just because I've been desensitized by, like, blood and gore, but, it's just my take on it.
There's definitely a trend for movies getting more bloody and gory over time, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously we're coming from a different era. So, yeah, episode 6 begins when they're like, oh no, sound the alert, and they, like, escape, and then, they get trapped in a room, and the dog's like, well, okay, we're in the room where we need to enact the plan, so let's just work on it. And then the Dalek Supreme Commander, or one of the Supreme Commanders, because turns out there's a Dalek High Council. I mean, who knew? But anyway.
Well, it makes sense. There's the Gold Dalek, the Black Dalek, etc. Yeah, he shows up on another spaceship, by the way. He wasn't on planet before. Should we explain how this Dalek looks?
It's gold.
And it has two little, instead of the one light bulb type thing, it's two
lamps
on its head.
Yeah. Well, the other Daleks have two light bulbs, but they're less powerful, and they barely ever flash because I guess the operators keep forgetting to do it.
This one also has a flashing light on its eye stalk.
Yeah. This Dalek, actually, I found out yesterday while I was reading about the serial. So you remember there was the Peter Cushing movies in the 60s with Peter Cushing as Doctor Who?
Yeah.
This Dalek was actually one of the Daleks from one of those films that was given to Terry Nation as a gift for his work on the film. And since they needed a unique Dalek for this one, and they only had 3 Dalek props that they've been using since the Daleks, and the wooden ones that they built specifically for this serial that they would use later, Terry Nation was like, hey, I've got this gold Dalek. I mean, it's a bit different, but it could work. So they're like, cool, can we borrow it? And he's like, yeah, sure.
Well, it's a good thing that it's different. I mean, you'd want
Yeah,
to
it's the
differentiate.
Supreme Commanders.
Yeah. But the Supreme Commander decides that the the Daleks running the show on Spyridon are incompetent, so he just kills one of them right off the bat.
I mean, it's not the first time it's happened.
No, and I doubt it's the last.
Remember Dalek Monster Plan? They just kill off that whole spaceship of Daleks.
Yep, I don't think this is the last time we'll be seeing that.
Dalek on Dalek violence. Right, so the Doctor is kind of chipping away at this wall that's holding back some molten ice, and they're going to put a bomb in it, and it's going to blow up, and it'll release the ice onto the Daleks below. There are like 10,000 of them.
Right, they're sort of in, I guess, this refrigerated cavern-looking type of thing.
Yeah, we didn't mention that they actually split up, and Joe and the one Thal.
The love interest.
Which one did
I forgot his name. I don't remember his name.
Latep. They've kind of split off, and apparently they're going to go through the ventilation shaft, and I guess the plan was that if the Doctor and co didn't make it to the ventilation shaft in time, Joe and Latep would, because they'd be going a different route.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, covering their bases.
Except Doctor and co made it first, and Joe and Latep ended up being late. Mainly because they got distracted by the Supreme Commander landing.
I think we sort of, over the course of time, the show sort of lost the trope of split up at every possible situation that you possibly can,
which is good, because that trope was terrible.
Yeah, it got them into trouble a lot. I think in Marco Polo, they did it multiple times. Just every possible instance where they could have split up, they did. And it just didn't work out for them. But anyway, what even happens then?
So
episode 6, I think, seemed a little padded.
The whole serial was padded, but we'll talk about that in 1 second as soon as we finished it. The Daleks are about to bust through this makeshift barricade they made, and they do, but I guess Joe and Latep drop a bomb. Latep throws a bomb at him, blows up a couple Daleks. They come through, the Doctor puts the bomb in the wall, it blows up. They're like, oh no, it didn't work, but then it does. One of the Daleks gets caught in the blast and gets destroyed. And then all the Daleks get coated in a sea of molten ice.
And the Doctor and everyone else make their exit into the forest. And the Thals, who actually did not think they would be getting back to Skaro.
Yeah, they thought it was a suicide mission.
Right, but they realized that they can now just use the Dalek Supreme, not the Dalek Supreme, the Supreme Commander, the ship that had landed there and I guess was unattended, or maybe they were just planning on killing the Daleks inside. But they figure out that they can use that, so they say their goodbyes to the Doctor. And well, you should explain it. I think you liked it more than I did.
What, the Doctor gives them the speech about not glamorizing war?
Yeah. Well, actually, also Kodal, I don't remember if it was before or after the whole monologue, but Kodal thanks the Doctor for telling him what he did back in the cell.
Yeah.
So that was where it was sort of wrapped up, touched upon again, not really, kind of, sort of, maybe. But anyway.
Yeah, well, Terran asks the Doctor if there's anything they can do for him, since he just helped save their entire race a second time. When the Doctor says, yeah, there is one thing. Like, don't glamorize war. You've always been a peaceful people, so, like, don't change that now. When you go back, make sure to remember all the people who died for you to be victorious.
Right, and don't tell stories of what you did here.
Yeah. Be brutal about it.
Yeah. I mean, don't heroicize the entire thing, essentially, if that's even a word.
I think it is. But I'm not going to look it up. Yeah, I liked the speech, because it was, whatchamacallit, it was a big character development moment for the Doctor that I think indicates the switch in his character that's happened over the past, like, season-ish, since he was, was a jerk when he got exiled to Earth, which we've mentioned multiple times on this show.
Yeah, multiple times this episode, actually.
And then, he starts to lighten up when Joe becomes his companion, like a season later. And then now he's back to being the Doctor. He shows up, he stops the bad guys, and then he leaves.
Well, no, this does feel very second or first Doctor-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And that might in part be due to the fact that it's Terry Nation writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually become a trend that you're like, okay, we see the switch in the Doctor, and I agree, but I also think it is in part due to the writers.
Yeah, definitely.
I think some writers here sort of portray the Doctor a little more harshly. And then Terry Nation is obviously was more prominent back in the first Doctor era. And,
Well, Terry Nation didn't write for the second Doctor.
Yeah, or anything until now.
Feast of Stephen.
But yeah, this was a nice little monologue, I guess.
You guess.
Again, I don't really like speeches, platitudes, things like that.
You'll have to get used to it.
Yeah,
especially
not
when we
really.
get to the reboot.
I have a feeling I'm not going to like the reboot.
There were good episodes in the reboot. But, that's also why the 12th Doctor's great, because he has a monologue, but he's like, you know what? I'm just an idiot with a box.
Still have a feeling I'm not going to like the reboot.
We'll see when we get there. So anyway, Joe and Latep are off to the side, and then Latep's like, I want to take Joe to Skaro, Doctor. And he's like, okay, well, I don't have any.
Do you mean Ganatus is like, hey, I want to take Barbara, I want to have Barbara stay with me on Skaro, Doctor?
No.
But that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, well, except in that one, Ganatus didn't ask the Doctor for permission.
Yeah, he asked Barbara, and she's like, yeah, hell no.
Yeah, and this one...
She doesn't actually say hell no.
Latep was like, hey, Doctor, I was wondering if you had, anything against that. And the Doctor's like, well, if it's what Joe wants, I don't have anything against it. Which I think...
Yeah, see, internally he was like, please, 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 no.
No, I was surprised he was just totally okay with it, especially given, Peladon, where he was like, okay, Joe, guess we should go now.
Yeah, I guess. I did think that too, slightly. I kind of just brushed it off as thinking... Because immediately after I thought, probably the Doctor thought, yeah, she's not going to do it. Or, you just knew she wouldn't do it.
He does know Joe better than we do.
But yeah, obviously she doesn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be quite disappointing if she did. Have her get written out like this. On a one-off, character-specific, or serial-specific character love interest, like Vicky.
Or Susan.
Yeah, Susan's... I think we've generally agreed multiple times that Susan's was a little better.
Yeah. At least I hope Joe doesn't pull a Dodo. That would make less sense than it did with Dodo, because Dodo was only there for a couple serials, and so her just kind of noping off didn't have that much of an impact. But Joe's been here for 3 seasons now.
Either way, that's not what happens. Obviously, Joe continues to travel with the Doctor, and it ends with the Thals heading off. Meanwhile, the Gold Dalek and some other Daleks have pursued them, so the Doctor and Joe run through the forest into the TARDIS and head back to Earth.
Well, not after the Doctor shows Joe Skaro, and he's like, any regrets? And she's like, no.
Not before, you mean, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
but anyway.
For derailing that. It's okay, I think this whole show is us derailing each other.
Pretty much. Choo-choo. And then she's like, there's only one place I want to go. And then somehow she works the TARDIS scanner and flips it to Earth.
Yeah, I think we determined that after a while, companions start to know how to use the TARDIS. Jamie kind of did.
That's true.
And he was from 18th century Scotland.
Yeah, well, so she does that, and she's like, the only place I want to go is home. The Doctor smiles like, home it is. And then it cuts to the Daleks like, we will get reinforcements contact High Council for rescue ship. We will have our revenge.
Right, and they imply that the Daleks who were coated in the molten ice aren't dead.
Right, and just gonna bring this up now. There's actually an audio drama where the Seventh Doctor ends up on Spyridon when the Daleks are unfreezing the invasion force.
So, like, almost right after this.
Apparently, like, actually 10,000 years or something in the future. Well, not 10,000, like 1,000.
1,000 years to get to unfreezing their
The Doctor
largest
mentions
force?
it's going to take them hundreds of years to unfreeze the Daleks. I mean, in the serial, he says it's going to take them hundreds of years to unfreeze.
Does he?
Yeah.
That sucks for them. I mean, that's the largest amount of Daleks amassed in one place so far, and they're out of commission for 1,000 years.
Yeah. But then later the Seventh Doctor shows up when they're there. And I vaguely had the ending of that audio drama spoiled for me. So, yeah, the serial wasn't that great of a conclusion to last week's, but I think if it had been on its own, I think it would have been better.
Yeah, I mean, what we were looking for, I think, in this serial was a follow-up, especially considering what we discussed at the end of last week's episode. Like, there might go more into the Ogron homeworld and things like that, and wrap up the Earth Draconia thing. And they didn't really do that. They sort of just connected what might have been another serial entirely through a few lines of almost throwaway dialogue in episode 4. It made sense how they connected it, but at the same time, I don't think it was a proper follow-up in the way we were expecting. So I think it was just our expectations that might have made us dislike this serial more than we would have.
Yeah, I was reading production information, obviously, which is how I knew about the Terry Nation thing, but basically because this was his 10th anniversary season, Barry Letts was kind of like, we should do like a big epic plotline like Dalek Monster Plan, but he thought that a 12-episode serial wouldn't keep viewers' attention.
And he's probably right.
For 3 months, so he decided, well, we can split it into 2 serials, and we'll bring back 2 of the Doctor's biggest enemies. We'll bring back the Master in the first half.
The Ogrons in the first half. No,
and we'll bring back the Daleks in the second part. Just so happened Terry Nation had an opening in his schedule, so he's like, well, I can write it. Because apparently when they brought back the Daleks in Day of the Daleks, part of the deal was they had to give Terry Nation first right to refuse any Dalek scripts. So they went to him like, we're going to write a Dalek story. And he's like, well, I have an opening. I can write it. Mm-hmm. And then...
so he sort of just did,
so he wrote it as... Yeah, I think he actually wrote it as a separate serial because Barry Letts apparently drastically rewrote the first episode to tie it in with the previous serial.
Uh-huh.
So I think it was originally intended to be its own serial.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I don't think Terry Nation knew that it was going to be connected to Frontier in Space. And then Barry Letts kind of rewrote it to fit it in so that they could have this 12-episode loose-fitting arc.
Uh-huh. God, what was I going to say? Jeez. Yeah, completely blanking on something I had to say. But...
Well, I also felt that this serial was just also incredibly padded. I didn't see any mention of this being written as a 4-episode serial originally. I think it was originally written as a 6-episode serial.
Yeah, because they wanted to do the whole 12-episode thing, but then it didn't.
I feel like this serial would have been really good as a 4-episode serial if you cut out all the padding and just kept the major moments and had them move quicker from moment to moment.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem in a lot of 6-episode serials. It's just it's not it's not important moment to important moment. It's sometimes a lot of traveling, sometimes a lot of 10 minutes spent in a ventilation shaft. And episode 6, I think, of this serial was particularly drawn out because they get to the city by the end of 5, and I think perhaps they kind of just didn't know what they wanted to do with, okay, they're in the city and they have this one specific thing they have to do and we have to draw that out over 23 minutes.
Right.
What I was going to say before also is Terry Nation, either intentionally or unintentionally, just kind of rewrote the Daleks here, like we mentioned before. And perhaps that was like, okay, due to the whole 10th anniversary thing, you want to harken back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps it's just because, it's the same writer and, they tend to want to do the same types of things that they like. You have, if you've written things, you have specific plot points that you like and you want to use it or you think they're good. So, whether intentional or not, this is very similar to the Daleks.
It's basically just a reworking of the Daleks, to be honest. I mean, it features the Daleks in a city being attacked by the Thalls.
And they're in a jungle. Like this.
In a jungle. And someone hides in a Dalek, and then there's
They break into the city multiple times.
The shoehorned in love plot at the end. But I don't think that explicitly hurt the serial, but I think it didn't help it either.
Perhaps. I say this a lot, but perhaps, if you have been watching for all 10 years, and it's 73, and you see this, you might feel, maybe not a sense of nostalgia, but just, I don't know what you'd feel, but you realize, okay, maybe it's harkening back to that.
Yeah.
And like, hey, they're doing like a little throwback to that, that's nice, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the way we're watching it, we're just like, wow, it's the same thing we saw a year ago. Great.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't dislike the story majorly, but other than that, that's pretty much all I have to say. I think it was like the good side of mediocre.
It was decent. It was not what I was expecting.
Not what I was expecting. The tagline for this podcast. So anyway, you can email us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. Do you disagree with our assessment of Planet of the Daleks or just the entire show in general? Do you disagree with...
Do you disagree with everything we say on this podcast?
It's possible. We could just be completely wrong about everything.
Are you the complete antithesis to us?
Start your own podcast and then guest on our podcast and cause us to have like a 3-hour argument.
It wouldn't make sense, actually, if you disagree with everything we say, because we disagree with things
within the show.
Yeah. So you'd have to have 2 hosts who each disagree with one of us.
Weird mirror universe version of us. Weird. Remember, you can also check us out on YouTube or on iTunes. Leave a rating on iTunes if you like the show. 1 star if you think it sucked. Not 1 star if you didn't. And you can check out the website at decorativevegetable.com.
You can check us out on Facebook. You can like us on Facebook. You can check us out on Twitter. And you can follow us on Twitter. And next week, we say goodbye to Season 10 in The Green Death. But until then, the end.